You can't be serious. $140,000 for junk? Coburn Steel has been tossing that scrap over your fence for 15 years. You can't actually think we owe you anything. The man on the other side of the counter didn't move. Lorne Beckett, 23 years old, hands still chalked with iron dust, from the morning shift in his own shop, watched the regional director of Coburn Steel set the invoice down on the laminate counter like it was a parking ticket. Lorne didn't pick it up. He already knew every number on it. "I was 9 when your company started throwing it over," he said. His voice didn't climb. 15 years of scrap iron. You'd have paid $600 a month to haul it. I saved you every cent of that. He slid a second page across the counter. That invoice isn't half of what the math actually says. Come see what I built with it first. Then we can talk about what you owe. Regional Director Patrick Holt's smile went uncertain for the first time since he'd walked in. He had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that fence. The fence went up in the summer of 2006. 180 meters of cedar post and wire running the full length of the western edge of a long, narrow plot of land in Dryden, Ontario, a mill town that sat between the Canadian Shield and the English River and had been slowly bleeding jobs since the paper plant reduced shifts in 1999. On one side of that fence, a 12-acre gravel lot where Coburn Steel, mid-size structural fabricator, would build a 15,000-square-foot production facility the following spring. On the other side, 2.8 acres of scrubby boreal land that a man named Lorne Beckett had bought in 1973 for $1,100 from a cousin who needed the money to get south. Solomon was Lorne's grandfather. He died before Lorne was born. But the land passed down through the Becketts, the way certain things pass through families that don't have much else to pass. Quietly. Without paperwork anyone fully understood. 2.5 acres of spruce and clay that 3 different buyers had tried to talk them out of over the years, and none of them had managed it. By 2021, that land held something that people slowing down on Highway 17 could not quite make sense of from a moving vehicle. Lorne Beckett was 23 that autumn, broad through the shoulders, his grandfather's hands, a quiet way of holding himself that strangers sometimes read as shyness, and people who knew him understood as patience. He had lived in the Beckett house his whole life with his grandmother Adeline, who still drove herself to the grocery store, and still made tea in the same brown pot every mornings at 6, and who had raised Lorne alone from the time he was 7, when his mother left for Thunder Bay and decided that leaving was the easier thing to keep doing. Lorne's father had never been a fixture. He came through twice that Lorne could actually remember, and both times he left something behind. Once a pocket knife, once the particular kind of quiet a boy learns to carry when he understands that wanting someone isn't enough to make them stay. What Adeline gave him instead was the land, and the time to be on it, and a refusal to tell him what to do with either. To understand what Lorne built there, you have to go back to the summer he was 9. In 2009, Coburn Steel's Dryden facility went to double production. The plant took in raw structural steel, I-beams, channel iron, flat bar, hollow sections, and cut it to precise commercial specifications for construction contracts across northwestern Ontario. Precision cutting meant offcuts, pieces of perfectly sound structural steel ranging from 8 centimeters to a meter long, left over when a beam was trimmed to a buyer's exact dimension, too short to re-roll, too varied to bundle and resell. On Coburn's internal ledger, they were classified under a single flat phrase, end of process material. Disposal ran $600 a month, paid to a recycler out of Kenora, who loaded it into a flatbed twice a week and drove it to a secondary smelter 3 hours east. A steel bin sat at the back of the Coburn lot, 15 meters from the Beckett fence. It filled with off-cut lengths of hot-rolled angle iron, with squares of steel plate, with short drops of hollow square section that still rang like a bell when you dropped them. Lorne was 9 years old when he started watching that bin. He had nothing else to do. His grandmother worked mornings at the library. There was no day camp he was going to. So he spent that first summer at the property line with his fingers through the fence wire watching grown men toss pieces of metal into a bin. with the casual ease of people who have never had to think about where anything comes from. One morning in July, he walked the length of the lot, found the side gate unlocked the way it usually was in the middle of a shift, and walked through it to the loading area. The shift lead was a man named Terry Galvin, 51 years old, Dryden-born, had worked metal his whole adult life and had the forearms to show for it. He looked down from the dock and found a kid standing below him, pointing at a length of angle iron balanced across the top of the bin. "You throwing that out?" Terry looked at the piece, looked at the bin, looked at the kid. "Costs us $600 a month to haul this stuff," he said. He shrugged a slow Dryden shrug. "You want a piece? Take a piece. Just stay back from the forklift lanes." 12 words. A man and a boy, no paperwork, nobody watching. Lorne carried 3 pieces home that afternoon, one at a time, the cut ends wrapped in an old cloth so they wouldn't tear his hands. He didn't know what he was going to do with them. He just couldn't watch them drive away in a flatbed to get melted down when they still looked like something. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Terry started telling his yard hands to set the shorter drops near the fence instead of walking them all the way to the bin. Over the next 15 years, 2 or 3 times a week, metal came over the Beckett fence, and Lorne Beckett carried it in, sorted it, measured it, and built something out of it that nobody in Dryden saw coming. Here is what he actually did with it. At first, it was exactly what it looked like, a heap. 9 years old, he was stacking things the way 9-year-olds stack things, which is to say without any system beyond keep it off the ground. His grandmother came out one September morning before her library shift, looked at the growing pile along the fence line, and asked him what exactly he thought he was building. "Saving it," Lorne said. From what? He didn't have an answer. He just knew that something that still rang when you hit it wasn't garbage. That November, cleaning out the crawl space under the back of the house for the winter, he found a wooden crate. Inside it, wrapped in oilcloth that had gone stiff and brown, his grandfather Solomon's tools, a set of files, 3 cold chisels still sharp enough to score glass, a machinist's square, a small leather booklet, the cover worn smooth with measurements written in pencil columns, dimensions, material types, small diagrams of joints and brackets, and on the inside front cover, in handwriting that pressed harder than the rest, a single sentence. "A man who knows what a thing is worth has already won half the argument." Solomon Beckett had been a machinist, a good one by the evidence of the tools. The trade had skipped a generation, then another, and landed in the hands of a 9-year-old who had stumbled into the world's most patient apprenticeship without knowing that's what it was. Lorne started teaching himself. He learned that steel left on bare ground rusts at the contact point first and works inward. So he built a simple timber rack, 4 posts, 2 rails, to keep everything off the clay. He sorted by profile, angle iron on the left, flat bar in the middle, hollow section on the right, plate steel laid flat on a separate timber frame because it couldn't stand on edge without toppling. He measured every piece with his grandfather's square, wrote the dimensions in a notebook of his own, and used a paint marker to dot the end of each bar with a color code. Red for angle, blue for flat, yellow for hollow. A 9-year-old system, but a system. He was 11 when he made the first thing. A garden gate bracket, 4 pieces of angle iron, drilled and bolted. It wobbled on one corner. He shimmed it with a scrap of flat bar and told himself the wobble was a lesson, not a failure. He was 12 when he bought his first real hand file at a garage sale in town. A 10-inch mill bastard, still half its original cut, and learned that steel could be brought to a dimension if you had enough patience and a flat surface to check it against. By 14, he was watching machining videos on a borrowed laptop late into the evening, learning to read the grain of a cut surface, learning what the color of a spark told you about the composition of the steel, learning why a hacksaw cuts better on the pull stroke than the push. He ruined 100 cuts before he trusted his eye. He kept the ruined pieces in a separate pile the way you keep things that costed you something, because they did. The town had names for it. Lorne's junkyard. The scrap heap on the highway. A boy in his grade 10 class, sitting behind him on the school bus, said that his dad had told him the Beckett place was one bylaw complaint away from being condemned. Lorne pulled his hood forward and looked at the road through the window. He already knew what was in that pile, which meant he already knew what the boy's dad didn't know, which meant the comment cost him nothing. His grandmother worried the way patient women worry, steadily, without drama, and mostly to herself. She brought it up once on a November evening when the pile was visible in the headlights as she turned into the drive. "Lorne," she said, "people talk, let them." She looked at him for a moment. "I just want to know you have a plan." "I'm working on it, Nan." She nodded once, poured her tea, and did not bring it up again. That was Adeline Beckett's particular form of faith. She extended it without conditions and checked on it without hovering. At 15, he sold his first piece. A set of custom shelf brackets, drilled and filed to a clean square edge, for a man on the next road over who was tired of the hardware store's stamped tin versions falling out of the drywall. $60. Lorne put the $60 in an envelope and drove with Adeline the following Saturday to an equipment auction yard in Fort Francis, 2 hours south, and came home with a 1962 Canadian Blount drill press seized at the quill that nobody else had wanted to look at twice. $85. He spent 3 weeks freeing it up, replacing the belt, learning to true the table with a machinist's square and a dial indicator he borrowed from a video he watched 40 times before he understood what he was looking at. When the quill finally moved clean and the drill bit ran true, he stood in the back shed in the February cold and just listened to the motor run. Not doing anything, just listening to it. That became the pattern. Make something. Sell it. Drive to the auction yard. Find what nobody else wanted. Bring it home. Bring it back. A metal bandsaw, the blade guides packed with rust, for $200. A horizontal milling machine the size of a chest freezer, seized solid, that he got for $350 because the auctioneer was tired of looking at it. An old arc welder, good bones, bad ground clamp, $40. He ran electrical drops in the shed himself, conduit and boxes, reading the Ontario Electrical Code at the library in the evenings and having Adeline check his work the way she used to check his homework. Not for the answers, but for the thinking. And the whole time the metal kept coming over the fence, 2 or 3 times a week. Terry Galvin had retired by the time Lorne was 16, but the arrangement had been absorbed into the informal operating culture of the Coburn yard, the way old arrangements get absorbed. Nobody could remember exactly why the short drops went near the fence. They just did, and nobody in 15 years had thought to ask. What nobody driving past on Highway 17 understood, looking at the rough face of the pile along the fence line, was that the rough face was a face only. Lorne had kept the unsorted drops and the unprocessed steel at the front, where it looked like exactly the kind of thing that earned a bylaw complaint. Behind it, invisible from the road, was something different entirely. Racks. Proper welded steel racks built from the same material they held, sorted by profile, by dimension, by grade where the grade was identifiable. Steel bar stamped with heat numbers, structural drops with the mill certification still legible on the web. Plate steel in thicknesses from 3 millimeters to 25. End grain dated with a paint marker going back to 2009. Not a scrap pile, an inventory, and behind the inventory, the shop. A 28 by 40-foot building that Lorne had built himself at 19. Steel frame and corrugated steel cladding, out of material that, according to Coburn's disposal records, did not exist because it had been written off as process waste. Inside, a drill press, a metal bandsaw, a milling machine, an arc welder, a MIG unit he'd rebuilt from a damaged hull, a surface plate, and a set of hand tools in a rollaway cabinet that Solomon Beckett would have recognized and respected. He told nobody. His grandmother knew the building was there. She had watched it go up, board by board, or rather beam by beam, through the kitchen window and had said nothing except to ask once whether the footings were deep enough for the frost line. He told her they were. She went back to her tea. In the spring of 2021, Coburn Steel was acquired by a holding company based in Mississauga. The acquisition brought new regional management. The new man's name was Patrick Holt, 36 years old, a lean and organized person who wore good boots on a plant floor and carried a tablet everywhere he went and did not make small talk. On his 4th day in the Dryden facility, He watched a forklift operator carry a bin of short drops to the back corner of the lot instead of the main disposal area. He stopped walking. He had a way of going very still when he noticed something. "Where's he taking that?" The floor supervisor gave the answer the way Dryden people give answers to questions they find slightly beside the point. "Old thing. Kid next door takes our scrap drops." Patrick Holt did not have a category for old thing. In his office 20 minutes later, he pulled the property records for the Beckett lot. He pulled 5 years of disposal invoices, $600 a month, consistent, through 2 ownership changes. He pulled the satellite view and looked at the long, pale stripe of the pile running the length of the fence. 2 columns formed in his mind the way they always did. Liability, opportunity. The liability was plain. An informal disposal arrangement with no documentation was the kind of thing that created problems in an acquisition audit. The opportunity was equally plain. They had been giving away a resource for no return. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, Patrick Holt walked through the side gate, crossed the gravel strip, and knocked on the door of the Beckett house. Lorne answered in a work shirt with a grease stain on the left cuff. He was 23. He looked at the man on his step and recognized the kind of person he was looking at immediately, the way you learn to read certain things by paying attention long enough. He stepped aside and let him in. Holt explained it in the clipped way of someone who had already decided the outcome. The arrangement needed to be formalized. Documentation trail, liability exposure. He was proposing a formal licensing agreement for use of the rear section of the Beckett property as a designated staging area, at the rate of $150 a month. Lorne poured 2 mugs of tea without being asked, the way his grandmother had taught him to, and set one in front of Patrick Holt. "That material isn't scrap," he said. "It's structural steel." Holt glanced up. "With respect, it's process waste. We pay $600 a month to remove it. I'm offering you $1,800 a year to keep it on your property. That benefits both parties." "No." Holt set his pen down. In his experience, no from someone in Lorne's position was the start of a negotiation. It wasn't. "Let me be direct," Holt said. His tone changed the way tones change in corporate offices when pleasantness runs out. "I can't maintain an undocumented process. Either we formalize this or I terminate the arrangement in 30 days, and that material becomes your liability." Section 27 of the Ontario Environmental Protection Act classifies uncontrolled accumulation of industrial-grade ferrous material as regulated waste. You clear it at your expense, or the township does it and recovers the cost. Lorne wrapped both hands around his mug. He looked out the kitchen window at the fence line. He looked back at Patrick Holt. "You should do what you have to do," he said. Holt waited for a counter. There was no counter. He made a note on his tablet, capped his pen with a small, precise movement, and left. That night, Lorne sat at the kitchen table until his grandmother came back from her evening walk. He told her about the letter that would be coming. She sat down across from him. She poured her tea. She didn't say what she'd said 15 years earlier, which was what everyone said, which was sell it, clear it, be done. She looked at him for a long moment. "How much time do you need?" 3 weeks. She nodded. She picked up her book. She said nothing else, which was the most precise kind of support she knew how to give. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Holt had moved quickly. It was on Coburn letterhead, copied to a legal address in Mississauga, cold and final. Lorne read it once at the kitchen counter, put it face down, and went out to the shop. Over the next 3 weeks, he did something that the drivers on Highway 17 slowed down to watch without understanding. He moved the pile, not to a hauler, not to a chipper. He moved it into the shop and the storage racks behind it, piece by piece, sorting as he went, carrying the long bars across the yard over his shoulder in the November cold, until the strip of ground along the fence was bare flat earth with nothing on it but dead grass and frost. From his office window, looking out over the lot on the final day, Patrick Holt saw the empty ground and felt the specific satisfaction of someone who has resolved a situation. He marked it closed in his project log. He had filed the property under the wrong section. He didn't check. The next morning, Lorne Beckett put on a clean shirt, not his only clean shirt, but the one he would have chosen anyway, picked up a manila envelope and drove to the Coburn facility on the highway. He asked the receptionist, a woman named Carol, to let Mr. Holt know he was there. He said he'd wait. Patrick Holt came around the corner 4 minutes later, the envelope already open. The smile left his face while he was still reading. "You can't be serious." He set the invoice on the counter. He shouldn't have done that. $140,000. That is not what this is. Lorne told him the math without raising his voice. $600 a month. 15 years. $108,000 in disposal costs that never touched Coburn's books, because the Beckett lot had absorbed them. The invoice, he said, was barely more than a quarter of the full calculation. He thought that was fair. "This is not a legitimate claim," Holt said. He was recovering now, the professional surface coming back. "We had an informal arrangement. You took material for personal use. That doesn't create." "I have used it," Lorne said. He reached into his coat pocket and set a short length of steel on the counter. A small machined part, a coupling bracket of some kind, finished to a clean edge, stamped with a simple mark on the face. He had made it that morning from a piece of angle iron, dated 2009. "I'd like you to come see how I've been using it," he said. Something in Patrick Holt, a quality that probably had more to do with the machined part than with anything else, wanted to know what was on the other side of that fence. He nodded once. They drove back in 2 vehicles, Holt's company truck following Lorne's pickup down the highway and up the gravel road to the Beckett place. Past the house, past the bare strip of earth along the fence line, empty now and somehow more unsettling for being empty. To the shop at the back of the lot, its walls made of corrugated steel cladding that had come from Coburn's own bin in various pieces over various years, a fact that no longer appeared in any company ledger because it had been written off as waste. Above the door, bolted to a lintel of welded hollow section, a sign, steel plate, hand-cut with a plasma cutter, the lettering done with a flap disc grinder, and finished with a file. 8 words in clean block letters that looked, in the flat November light, like something stamped on a structural beam in a mill. "A man who knows what a thing is worth has already won half the argument." Patrick Holt stopped under it. He didn't say anything. Lorne unlocked the side door, pushed it open, and stepped back. "After you." Holt walked in. He stopped walking almost immediately. The shop was clean. That was the first thing. Clean concrete floor, no clutter, every tool in a place and every place marked. The light came from fluorescent strips along the ceiling and from a high, narrow window on the south wall that put a bar of late morning sun across the surface plate in the corner. The air had a smell that people who have worked metal their whole lives recognize without being able to name it exactly. Iron and oil and the particular warmth of a motor that has been running. A drill press, a metal bandsaw, a milling machine, not large, maybe 1.5 meters long, but clean and trued and running at idle. A welding station with both MIG and stick setups. A rollaway cabinet with the drawers labeled in the same block letters as the sign outside. And along both walls, the racks. Welded steel racks built from the same material they held, every section labeled, every piece end-marked with a color dot and a paint marker date. The dates went back to 2009. 15 years of material sorted by profile, by dimension, by thickness, by grade where identifiable, the whole inventory recorded in a black notebook on a small steel desk in the corner. Patrick Holt picked it up without asking. Page after page of columns, date. Material type, dimensions, quantity, a running board foot equivalent, or rather linear meter equivalent, because Lorne had used metric throughout. A current value column using CME structural steel pricing, discounted 40% for cut and short lengths. "I used Coburn's own published price lists," Lorne said from behind him. "Discounted for short lengths. The math's in the back pages. Check it." Holt didn't answer for a moment. He was reading. He turned to look at the racks, then the machines, then the small machined part still sitting in his jacket pocket. He turned to look at Lorne Beckett, 23 years old, standing in a shop he had built himself out of material that corporate accounting had written off as having no value. He said, finally, in a voice that was not the voice he'd used at the reception counter, "You built all of this yourself. It wasn't quite a question." "Started when I was 9, Lorne said. One piece at a time. What followed was shorter than Patrick Holt had expected. There were calls. There were people from the Mississauga office. There were lawyers, briefly, until someone in the legal department ran the numbers on the optics of contesting the claim. No version of National Steel Company disputes. 15-year-old handshake deal with 23-year-old black machinist who built a functioning shop from their waste was a story that ended well in any newspaper in the country. They settled. Coburn paid Lorne Beckett $22,000 in cash and signed a 5-year supply agreement. Carter Custom Millwork. But this was Beckett Custom Fabrication now, a name on a freshly registered business certificate that Adeline had watched Lorne fill out at the kitchen table and had said nothing about except to ask whether he'd used his full legal name. He had. The agreement gave Beckett Custom Fabrication first right of purchase on all Coburn-Dryden offcuts at scrap rate, delivered to the rear of the Beckett property twice weekly. Patrick Holt wrote it up in his internal report as optimization of end-of-process material stream. He was noted for the initiative. He did not fully understand, then or later, which direction the value in that contract actually ran. The settlement wasn't where the business came from. Here's where it came from. Lorne took the $22,000 and did not spend it. He took a photograph of a set of custom structural brackets he had made the week before, angle iron, precision drilled, finished to a tolerance of 1/4 millimeter, and posted it on a machining forum with a single line. Made from steel someone threw away because it was too short to be useful. The post was shared 600 times in 4 days. A journalist from a trades publication in Toronto drove up to Dryden the following month and stood under the sign above the shop door while a soft-spoken 23-year-old explained, measurement by measurement, what 15 years of patience and a stack of someone else's offcuts could become. The orders came in faster than one person could fill. So Lorne did what his grandfather's notebook had been quietly pointing him toward his whole life. He turned the craft into something that could grow. He took a small business loan against the Beckett property, built a second, larger shop on the flat strip of ground along the fence where the pile had stood, right along the fence line, visible from the Coburn yard, in full sight of the people who had called it a junkyard. He hired Terry Galvin's youngest son, who had just come back from an ironworking apprenticeship in Sudbury and needed steady work. Then 2 of the men from his high school class who had called it the scrap heap and who, when they needed a job, had the honesty to show up and ask without pretending they hadn't. Then more. He negotiated supply agreements with 3 other fabrication plants in the region, taking their short drops at scrap rate and processing them into commercial components. Custom brackets, structural connectors, architectural metalwork for a restoration firm in Ottawa that had found his post online and sent him a photograph of a 19th century building with wrought iron details they needed reproduced. By the time he was 24, Beckett Custom Fabrication employed 14 people in Dryden. It had orders from construction firms in Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, and Toronto. It had turned a strip of boreal land and a fence line and 15 years of material that $600 a month had been spent trying to make disappear into the kind of operation that people in the region had started calling, half joking, half meaning it, the most interesting thing to happen to Dryden in 20 years. Adeline Beckett retired from the library. In the spring of the year, Lorne turned 24. He brought her out to the shop the morning before her last shift, walked her for the first time through the door under the carved steel sign. She had never gone in, all those years, out of a particular kind of respect for work in progress. And into the shop she had watched being built from the kitchen window. She stood in the clean morning light and looked at the racks, the machines, the notebook on the desk, the second building going up outside the window. She looked at the names on the employee board by the door, 14 of them. She was quiet for a long time. Then she put her hand flat on one of the steel racks, the way you touch something you have been waiting a long time to understand, and she cried. Not much. Adeline Beckett was not a person who cried much, but enough. All this time, she said. All this time, Lorne said. Beckett Custom Fabrication still operates on the 2.8 acres Solomon Beckett bought in 1973. The original shop, the one Lorne built at 19 from Coburn's own written-off steel, They kept exactly as it was when the business started. New employees get walked through it on their first day, past the welding station and the surface plate and the racks that still hold some of the original dated stock, so they understand what the place is made from. A contractor came in last winter to commission a set of custom spiral stair components for a heritage restoration in Winnipeg. He wanted something that would last 100 years and look like it knew it. Lorne walked him along the racks in the original shop, past the angle iron and the flat bar and the hollow section, and stopped at a small section of steel plate near the back. The plate had come over the fence in 2011. He'd been 11. The date was still on it in paint marker, in his own handwriting. This steel, he told the contractor, has been waiting 12 years for someone to want a staircase. On the wall of the small office Lorne built for himself from the original shop's overage, there is one framed piece of paper. The invoice, $104,380,000. A client noticed it and asked about it once. Lorne looked up at it, a small, slow look. I sent that to a man who told me what I'd built was a liability. He turned back to the bracket drawing on the workbench. The man hadn't understood. Most of them don't at first. There are people like Lorne Beckett in almost every town in this country, working quietly, building something from what everyone else has decided has no value, carrying it home one piece at a time while the people who ought to know better shake their heads from a distance. The spreadsheet cannot measure patience. The bylaw complaint cannot account for 15 years of accumulated knowledge in the hands of a kid who just couldn't stand to watch something good go to waste. If this story made you think of someone like that, someone with a quiet, stubborn project that nobody around them understood, tell me about them in the comments. If it stayed with you, the like button helps it reach the next person who needs to hear it. This channel tells the stories of patient people whose work outlasted the systems that called them invisible. Subscribe if that's the kind of story you want more of. I'll see you in the next one.